The psychiatric holdings being filled to the brim with players might start emptying out a little bit more now after this revolutionary discovery. Now, obviously the focus of this great addition is centered more around healers, but definitely DPS and tanks will be glad to be able to have this back as well. And then there is also still the question on what Blizzard might do after this has become available. Now, what we're talking about being available is this thing right here, what you see here on screen. The technology of being able to essentially pick and choose where you want to put your stuff on your frames, something that have been asked a lot by players, right? And now it's here. Although it didn't come from Blizzard, of course. The ability to split all of your different buffs across your frames, especially for specs like this one, like Preservation Evoker, that can have multiples of this, right? In this case, you have 2 copies essentially of Dream Breath, and then you have 2 of Reversion, and then you could have also Lifebind. You might also have any kind of externals, for example, that you can show on players like Time Dilation, right? Usually, if you're just using Blizzard default frames or the limitations of Blizzard, even if you were using something else like this one, which is Grid, before, you could only show them up in a line. At best, you could create 2 lines after a while, but that was it. Meanwhile, with this discovery now, we are able to place them wherever you want. This has been an ongoing discovery for a few weeks now from Harrek, who has started working on this a while ago in a much more rudimentary and primitive version, which has now improved a lot in how you can show your stuff, essentially. This comes, of course, preloaded with most of the tools for healers in what you want to show in terms of indicators, being the health color, changing the health color using a different icon, a different shape, or a different bar. You can then pick your ability from the ones you want. Most of these, for most specs, will be available. Like if you move from Preservation, for example, to Holy Paladin, and you want to create a new icon indicator, you're gonna have Holy Bulwark, Eternal Flame, you have your beacons that you can show, you have your Blessing of Sacrifice, etc., etc., and you can pick them and place them wherever you want. There is some of the things players wanted, which is the overlay, the health color change. For example, if you want to know who has Echo, right? You have them all covered up in a different color. Sure, of course, it's not as pixel perfect as Cell, for example, where you were able to create an overlay that was on a lower alpha, for example, so you could still see the HP bar, or you were able to create an overlay that was also decreasing in time with the timer of the buff. So you actually, not only do you have the overlay, but you also know how long Echo is lasting, for example. But it's still good enough, of course, compared to what we had before. This was a massive improvement over the initial frames made available by Blizzard after the removal of all of these add-ons, the restrictions for all of these add-ons. Now, the most important part of this addition from the Harrek's add-on, the advanced raid frames, is the fact that this is sort of a skinner for other add-ons. As you can see, I have the Harrek add-on for the designer of putting stuff in different places, but this is not the actual add-on itself. It's still Grid. This is still Grid, right? So I am benefiting from all of this while using Grid. Grid simply hooks up on the add-on and allows you to shape these things based on what the add-on allows you to do. For example, in the bottom right icons, you can now use the same tags made available by Harrek's add-on. So all of the things for the evoker. So you can put Dream Breath in bottom right icon and then a different icon for making the Echo version of Dream Breath. If you still want to have a single group that expands rather than having to make individual groups for each icon, you can just create, instead of a single icon group, you make an icons group and select multiple of them in the same one. Same goes for the health bar. With the add-on enabled, you're able to go to the health bar and simply add, in terms of colors, just add Echo. And now the health bar can be colored because Echo is in. You can also obviously change the color if you don't like green for some reason. So now you can be back to somewhat similar to what you used to have in terms of the freedom of placing these things wherever you want. Obviously, it's not as open and wide and detailed as your previous add-ons because the restrictions are still there. Don't forget, these things, as per our title, our thumbnail, these things are still guesswork. They're still trying to guess while skirting around these secret values, this box of secrets that Blizzard doesn't let you see. In this case, the box of secret is you can't see that I cast Echo on Captain Garrick. Now the game can see that I cast something and can see that Captain Garrick was hit by one of my buffs, but doesn't know what it is. However, you can make some pretty obvious guesses. For example, one of the things that aren't secret in this game, so an add-on can pick them up whenever it wants, is your stats, right? Just like you can choose which kind of health you want to show, where do you want to show it. You might even have a gigantic text in the center of your screen with your health if you wanted to. Now, another thing that isn't secret, for example, is your haste. So what happens if you make an add-on that says, show up this icon, this glowy icon in the center of my screen if my haste increases by 30% for 40 seconds. Now, this is a quiz. Which thing gives you 30% haste for 40 seconds? Well, there is one thing in the game, it's called Bloodlust. So, you don't have to know that you have been buffed by Bloodlust, you don't have to know that you have Bloodlust on you or someone cast Bloodlust, all you have to know is that your haste went up by 30% to know that you have Bloodlust. So you can show up the icon of Bloodlust to match the fact that you just got Bloodlust, not because you know it was cast, but because you knew the haste went up. This is a similar kind of logic that is being used by this new add-on. The fact that it matches together unit spellcast succeeded and unit aura. So it tries to match who casts something because you can still know what you cast, the spell ID of something you cast, and then you can also tell players receiving things. Unit aura, the fact that they received something from you. So you can tell you cast Dream Breath, and that you can also tell a bunch of players are receiving a buff from you. You don't know it is Dream Breath. The game doesn't let you see you're casting Dream Breath, but you can try to make this logical leap from you casting Dream Breath and 5 players receiving something from you. You can start playing a game of Guess Who, where you tell your add-on to start removing the buffs that wouldn't fit with this. You can start using filters like is raid to see if it's one of the spells enabled to show up in raid, or is nameplate only to see if it is one of the buffs or debuffs meant to show up only on the nameplates. You can see if it is harmful or if it is helpful. So eventually you get to the point where you can try to say, okay, well, I know I cast Dream Breath, I know the base cooldown of Dream Breath because the base cooldown is not secret. Yes, you can have haste that reduces the cooldown, you can have talents that change the cooldowns, those are all secret, shaping the different cooldowns, but the base cooldown is not. You can always get that. So you can know what you cast because you know you casted Dream Breath, you know the base cooldown of Dream Breath, you know players are receiving buffs from you. So you tell the add-on, okay, I guess this is Dream Breath. Now, you don't know for sure, the box is still dark, you still don't know what's inside, but because of these things you can still check you're making the educated guess that what you have cast must be Dream Breath. The same goes for figuring out, for example, once you have figured out, for example, you cast Temporal Anomaly, you receive the buff of Temporal Anomaly, the shield, and then when you get the shield you get a different buff from you. The only other time you get the double buff after receiving the Temporal Anomaly shield will be Echo, if you have the talent, right? And then when you use Dream Breath, not only do you get the Dream Breath icon to be able to show, but you can also see the follow-up, the Echo version of the Dream Breath, which is another example of casting Dream Breath gives you a different icon. So once you can guess you're casting Dream Breath, if you gain a second buff right next to Dream Breath, which has the same duration as well, for example, you can also make the guesstimate work that must be the Echo version of Dream Breath. Or perhaps you can still make the guess based on duration, because you might still use Echo on them, but then not use Dream Breath on them. So you would only give them the duplicated version, but not the original one. But that would still work, because you will still know that the Echo was turned into a different buff, you know the duration of the different buff you're getting, even though still it is secret in the box and you're still not able to see exactly what it is. You can make this logic work for most of the specs and most of the buffs available for the healers to allow you to have now this new and much improved styling. Now, while this was happening, Blizzard also went up with their improvements to the UI, which is very funny that these came up around the same time, because one improves the quality of life of your healers by about 49 points, while Blizzard's version that comes out at the same time is going to increase your quality of life by about 3 points. And this was the improvement to the frames that Blizzard came up with today. Hey guys, finally, after the alpha and the beta of this game, and these add-on changes being live for over 3 months, now, about 9 days before the release of the early access of the expansion, we give you this amazing quality of life where you can have a few select spells always show up first. So now in this one single line of buffs that you always get to show up if you're using the Blizzard frames, now Echo, Riptide, Atonement, Renewing Mist and Enveloping Mist, Reju, Germination and Life Bloom, and Beacon of Light and Beacon of Fate will be first. So even if you had 2 other buffs show up and then you cast Reju, then Reju will automatically show up basically in the bottom right of your buffs. That's what Blizzard came up with not even 2 weeks before the release of the expansion. Something that you would have expected, for example, being in the game months ago and being extremely basic, had to be something to be added months later. That's how slow Blizzard is moving in these terms of improvements and quality of life changes for your frames. Now, obviously, this was leading towards the question of what is Blizzard going to do towards this new addition. This one now being available in the form of an add-on, the ability to reshape and reposition, for example, all of your different buffs. Because it could be somewhat tricky. For example, number one, they could do nothing, which is weird and tricky because according to their goals, according to their announcements when they made these add-on changes, they wanted the base UI to be on a level playing field with the add-ons, right? But then if you have an add-on that allows healers to reposition, shape, and move buffs much better than what Blizzard default UI can do, wouldn't that be going against what Blizzard was saying they wanted to achieve with these add-ons? So would they stop this now that this is available for players? Perhaps they could go the opposite way. They could match what this is being done by add-ons. They could say, okay, then we will add this too into the game. This is far more unlikely because we haven't really gotten any kind of filtering in the game from Blizzard for pretty much anything. So it would be unlikely for them to add a filtering system like this in the game to match the add-ons. Perhaps what could be the better solution is the third point where they acknowledge that their point number one was kind of dumb, that they weren't going to be able to make the default Blizzard UI be as good and as effective as add-ons because of the amount of freedom add-on makers would have to shape things compared to the restrictions of Blizzard, and they simply allow for this to happen without trying to keep the base default UI on par with add-ons. Because no matter what players are asking, it's just very unlikely to ever see something like this in the default UI. Having things like multiple options as well as multiple abilities to shape and resize. We have never really gotten this in the game by Blizzard. These kind of precise single icon, single ability framing and shaping in the game. And on top of that, we are not, a couple of weeks into the beta. We are less than a couple of weeks before the release of the expansion. So this is not something that, even if it were to happen, it wasn't something that would be pushed out by Blizzard within a few days of the release of the expansion, right? It would take longer for them, knowing their times. We just saw what they came up with, a quality of life addition, something that is like several months late and came now. So trying to keep up with add-ons on this would be far too quick for their pace. For now, though, no complaining. As long as this add-on works, it's gonna be perfectly fine to play with. Better than what we have had so far. Up to this point in the beta and in the pre-patch, not as good as what we had before, but that was extremely hard to match. Also, as a bonus, these kind of profiles, if you make a grid, for example, profile using the styling generated by this Harrek's add-on, still allows you to import it. So you will be able to import profiles where you put and placed things with your grid positioning using the tags made by Harrek's add-on. And if you import it, those will still be matching. They will still be in the same positions. So it will also be quite easy to import and simply just pick one as a combo of add-ons, Harrek's and Grid, or Harrek's and other, raid/party frame add-ons that allows you to move around your buffs and debuffs around your frames. But for today, though, this was the point of this video. The much better and improved raid and party frames for mostly healers that will now be much more relieved to be able to actually sort stuff almost the way they want compared to the disaster we have been getting up to now from Blizzard, We will see if Blizzard will do anything at all about this, or will just look the other way and let this continue for the release of this first season of Midnight. But for today, this is what we have in terms of news on this Wednesday, weekly reset in EU as well. We are now starting our goodbyes by thanking everyone for having watched the video, together with, of course, everyone else who's been supporting completely for free by liking and commenting down below, as well as subscribing to the channel itself. Now, with these things out of the way, thank you guys again for watching. See you guys tomorrow, and in the meantime, I don't know, I'm looking up, there's nothing but sun, I'm looking at the temperature, it's like 19 degrees. Isn't this supposed to be winter?